What's up, Internet? My name's Gus, aka Black Penguin, and I'm here to give y'all my top 10 anime for the year 2020. I watched a lot of anime during 2020. Some would say too much. And by some, I mean most people. However, I didn't watch everything. I didn't watch Fruits Basket, The Misfit of Demon King Academy, Oregairu, Railgun, and other shows I'm sure that people really loved. So if this list doesn't include your 2020 favorites, that's cool, because these are just my personal picks based on what I watched this year and what I enjoyed the most. This video is also going to be as spoiler-free as possible. I'll be going into things like tone, writing, story direction, and the generalities of some character arcs. But I'll be avoiding major plot spoilers, so if you haven't seen these shows or maybe even heard of them, don't worry, you can watch this video without spoiling yourself. But as a heads up, there are a few sequel series in here, so I may spoil their previous seasons during the synopsis portion of my review. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and dive into my picks for the year. Number 10. Keep Your Hands Off Azokin. Whereas every other show is on this list because of its great writing or nuanced characters, Keep Your Hands Off Azokin makes the list due to its thick atmosphere of imagination and meta-narrative. What it puts forward is one of the most successful attempts to link a show's aesthetic to its central message. The result is the greatest love letter to anime ever in the form of an anime within an anime. Sakasa is obsessed with animation. Guided by the whims of her imagination, she sees creative inspiration in the world all around her. One day, along with her highly pragmatic and financially minded friend Kanamori, they meet the young and popular idol Mizusaki, who, unexpectedly, is also highly interested in animation herself. With Izakasa and Misusaki's new sense of camaraderie, as well as Kanamori's penchant for monetary gain, the three of them set out to create an anime. As a quick comparison, Keep Your Hands Off Azokin is akin to a more youthful and imaginative version of Shirobako, but as great as Shirobako was, it was very dense in plot and quite dry in tone. Keep Your Hands Off Azokin, on the other hand, rather than focusing on the operational aspects of anime production, spends a considerable amount of time endearing the viewer to the depths of creativity and imagination itself. Instead of the characters talking about and discussing the animation process, we see them in shared imaginative spaces, working collaboratively and metaphysically to create the world inside their minds. And by using the imaginations or visualizations of the characters to tell the story, the narrative becomes at once literal for the characters and metaphorical for the viewer. Watching the characters create fantastical worlds and machines, and then visualize the ranges of motion or mechanisms of movement for the purposes of animation, rekindled within me the passion I have for anime and animation. It brought me back to that childlike sense of wonderment and imagination, where the physical world is an inspiration for greater things within the mind. That creative passion for animated expression that makes the moving image so captivating. What's great is that these imaginative spaces are not just confined to the visual arts. In later scenes, we see the characters in a world of sound, harvesting audio wavelengths by hand for use in their production. Every single aspect of the creative process is portrayed in a beautifully conceived metaphor for imagination, and, when combined with the ethereal soundtrack, each imaginative sequence felt nearly euphoric. The overarching message of the show is that the capacity of human imagination knows no bounds, and that anything can be expressed through the medium of animation. It reminded me why I love anime, and if you're a fan of the creative process of animation itself, you should find this show to be a tribute to the animated image. At number 9, It Invaded. In a cerebral amalgamation of Psycho Pass, Minority Report, Inception, and the 2000 Jennifer Lopez thriller The Cell, It Invaded revolves around a police agency that employs the use of the Mizuhaname system, a platform that allows forensic investigators to collect cognition particles from murderers and use them to create an id well, a virtual manifestation of the killer's mind that detectives can actually enter and investigate. Jesus Christ, the layers on this show. This is probably the most complex plot in anime I've seen in, well, ever. The core concept behind the show is very reminiscent of, if not directly influenced by, the movie Inception. But whereas Inception, and I mean the actual process of Inception from the movie, was a cool concept, It Invaded's version of it is only part of a wider sci-fi ecosystem that is magnitudes more rich, dynamic, and rewarding. In the same vein of live-action procedural crime dramas, It Invaded starts with a basic formula. Cognition particles of serial killers are detected by investigators, which are then used to create a virtual reality based on the killer's mind. A detective enters the mind and navigates a dreamlike environment, while an outside team analyzes the data in real time and tracks down leads for real-world investigators. And if that's all the show was about, just non-serial episodes on separate cases, that would make for a great viewing experience on its own. But instead, this rich ecosystem of experimental criminal justice is only the stage for much greater conflicts. Namely, what is causing this increase of serial killers? What exactly is the Mizuhaname system? And how are all these serial killers linked to each other? The answers to these questions requires a trip down one of the most shocking and metaphysical rabbit holes in fiction, a long and macabre journey through the nested minds of several deviant murderers. And the closer you get to those answers, the more frightening the depths of human madness become. The result is a supremely dark and twisted look into the worst of humanity. And at the center of that pit of despair is Narisago, one of the most tragic characters I've ever seen in anime. A former police officer turned murderer, Narisago is at the forefront of the show as a prisoner who investigates the killer's minds on behalf of the police. You see, the requirement for entering a killer's mind is that one must be a killer themselves. And, as the show progresses, the circumstances that brought Narisago to this point are sorrowfully explored. The result is a slow-motion autopsy of the worst day of his life, the conclusion of which I found to be emotionally intense and fully satisfying. I wish I could go into more detail about what I loved about this show, but its mysteries are best left untouched for those who have yet to enjoy them. They serve to make It Invaded a deliciously compressed and nested enigma, and it very well could be my favorite sci-fi anime of all time now. So if you like head-scratching murder mysteries with heavy doses of science fiction, as well as characters with highly compelling yet tragic circumstances, It Invaded will be right up your alley. Number 8. Deca-Dence. I would say that those who have not seen Deca-Dence should do so with the least amount of foreknowledge of the plot as possible, and since this video is meant to be mostly spoiler-free, this review is going to be a little shorter than the others. Natsume lives in the mobile fortress city of Deca-Dence, the last refuge of humanity from the Gadol, a race of monsters that has brought humanity to the brink of extinction. Natsume wishes to become a gear, a member of the squad that fights the Gadol, but instead, she's assigned to the armor repair team, led by the unassuming and surly Kaburagi. But one day, during a Gadol attack, she gets dragged into the battle, only to get saved by the curiously skilled Kaburagi. Deca-Dence was a sleeper hit in the 2020 summer season. No one was expecting it, so me and many others were completely blindsided by its unique premise. The story was clever, the universe full of intrigue, and the pacing very pleasant. It was full of mystery and tension, with a great deal of action, as well as moments of weighty drama. And if that all sounds a little non-specific, that's because I'm being purposely vague. You see, what makes this show great is the way the story was told. It exists in two parts. Two intertwined plot lines that become increasingly tangled as the show progresses, each offering a great contrast in both visual design and tone that mirrors the bifurcated narrative. Now, I'm saying this much because I think it'll help to know that things are not what they initially seem. You see, a lot of viewers apparently soured on the plot once the second half of the story was revealed, and as a result, those that dropped Deca-Dence after episode 2 missed out on one of the most creative and rich worlds in anime in recent memory. It had one of my favorite themes, the perseverance of humans in the face of mortality and our resistance to any concept of fate. This show made me feel human. It romanticized our resilience as an agency-seeking species and proved that succumbing to one's sense of humanity can sometimes be the most noble thing you can do. I would implore everyone to watch this show, at least the first 3 episodes. I think you will find that its world and its message are surprisingly deeper than you would suspect. Number 7. Dorothea. Every so often, a show comes around that's just so fucking weird that you have no choice but to watch it. And in 2020, that show was Dorothea. In a run-down futuristic world, humans live in a dimension called the Hole. Sorcerers, from the Sorcerer dimension, travel to the Hole to practice their magic on human victims. Kaiman, a resident of the Hole, was one such victim. Now with the head of a lizard and no memory, he hunts sorcerers with his friend Nikaido, in hopes of finding the sorcerer who transformed him. First off, the world of Dorothea was just so goddamn cool. In the Hole, they've constructed a gritty, cutthroat universe, a cityscape overrun with grime where everyone struggles to get by, one in which the inhabitants have grown accustomed to violence and batshit crazy happenings. And that's an element of dystopian futures that I personally can never get enough of, the jaded citizen going about their day with no regard to the insanity around them. The whole aesthetic also had a great punk vibe to it, making for some cool character designs and clothing styles. The show also has one of the most interesting magic systems I've seen in anime. Rather than taking the easy way out and using a nebulous, non-corporeal concept of magic, the introduction of smoke as a lifeblood of sorcerers is an unexpected element that quickly draws in the viewer. It's a magic system that is very amenable to tangible handling and physical quantification, especially since it exists within a physical circulatory system within the bodies of sorcerers. Grounding the concept of magic to the physical world opens up a lot of possibilities, and in my opinion, speaks to the forethought given to the universe. The world is also full of some of the most interesting characters I've seen in quite some time. Nearly every member of the cast can carry the scene on their own, possessing enough presence, background, and voice acting to keep the interest of the audience. But what you might not know if you haven't watched it is that Dorothea also has a heavy helping of violence and body horror. The show isn't afraid to focus on its horror, presenting disturbing imagery and macabre violence from time to time. Faces get ripped off, limbs get severed, and humans get transformed into grotesque insects. Yet, this never becomes gratuitous. Its usage always timed for dramatic effect, which allows the narrative to seamlessly shift in and out of these elements as the story demands it. Portraying such scenes without devolving into caricature, while simultaneously moving the story forward, preserves both the shock factor of this violence as well as the full impact of the major plot beats. It's just a plain fun show, a well-constructed world, brimming over with violence and engrossing characters. And now that it's fully out of Netflix release jail, I would implore any anime fan to give it a shot. Coming in hot at number 6, Rent-A-Girlfriend. Coming off of 2019's much-watched dumpster fire that was Domestic Girlfriend, I had pretty much given up on finding critical acclaim in any anime with the word girlfriend in the title. I mean, I'd watch one, but I would not necessarily recommend it. And since I was not familiar with its manga, I was ready for Rent-A-Girlfriend to be another guilty pleasure devoid of any real substance. But to my surprise, the show had quite a lot going for it. Feeling lonely and dejected after getting dumped by his girlfriend, Kazuya downloads a unique dating app that offers rental girlfriends. He decides to book a well-rated girl named Chizuru, who performs the role perfectly. However, growing disgusted with the inauthentic nature of her profession, Kazuya calls Chizuru out and expresses his disapproval. Chizuru suddenly breaks character, scolding Kazuya and putting him in his place, putting his assumptions and viewpoints on romance in perspective. But when Kazuya suddenly gets word that his grandmother has been hospitalized, the two rush to go see her, mistakenly giving his grandmother the impression that they are really a couple. Now, in order to keep up appearances, the two maintain the rental services, entering into an agreement that becomes increasingly complicated as more and more people get drawn into the lie. One of the surprising reasons I liked this show was because Kazuya's internal turmoil serves as a sort of Trojan horse for healthier viewpoints on romance. The character starts out with unfortunate opinions on women and intimacy. Much of his decisions in the show are informed by his sexual urges and unhealthy attachment to women. But Kazuya is consciously aware of this, often feeling shame at his actions and struggling to both resist and rewrite his instincts. In that respect, the show is inadvertently touching on more serious subject matter. Kazuya is still a piece of shit, but you end up rooting for him. Not for his romantic success, but his growth as a person. But the other reason I liked Rent-A-Girlfriend is because it goes in a direction that few, if any, romantic anime series have gone. What I might call anti-romance. The crux of the show is based on the resisting of romantic urges. Kazuya desperately tries to separate his loneliness and sex drive from his feelings towards Chizuru. She's a perfect girlfriend, beautiful, kind, outgoing, and fun. But it's just an act. It's a job for her, a means to make a living and work towards the future. Kazuya is aware of this and actively tries to dissuade any affections he has for her because he doesn't think it would be fair. This dynamic imbues Kazuya with embers of altruism, sparking his growth from self-centered horndog to decent human being. An opposite from Kazuya's personal growth is Chizuru's thawing emotions towards him. Her pity for him reinforces his irredeemable nature. But with every kindness she shows him, he grows. And that growth slowly endears him to her, making their relationship more intimate and complicated, yet not necessarily any less platonic. Of course, he takes steps backward now and then, but those steps are the comedic glue that holds the whole thing together. The cringy yet hilarious train wrecks and slapstick reactions that propel the show into laugh at the pain territory. And when you throw in the rest of Kazuya's friends and other potential romantic interests, you get a fun and emotionally nuanced take on the harem genre. It might still be a guilty pleasure, and I'm probably reading more into it than most, but Rent-A-Girlfriend should be considered a next-level entry in romantic comedy anime. One foot in the classic harem genre, and another in a new territory, defined by the protagonist's growing romantic maturity. Number 5, Golden Kamuy Season 3. Season 3 of Golden Kamuy picks up right where Season 2 left off. With Noperabu dead and the only key to the gold buried deep in Ashirapa's mind, Ogata and Kironaki take Ashirapa north in hopes that the journey will jog her memory. Meanwhile, Sugimoto pursues them with the help of the Seventh. In Season 3, the hunt for the tattoos and gold takes almost a back seat as the show focuses on Sugimoto's journey to find Ashirapa, during which she herself goes on a sort of walkabout to learn more about her father and his motivations. It's somewhat a low-key season when compared to the absolutely batshit crazy events of the prior two, with a heightened emphasis on events that predate the story as we know it. We got some very rich world building, along with many missing puzzle pieces that help to provide a clear picture of the present situation. As Ashirapa learned more about her father, the mysteries surrounding him and his past began to make sense. She started to see the heretofore unseen context of her upbringing, and the audience was painted a somber profile of a man and his role in a regional conflict. The presentation of these elements of the season played out like a deep dive historical documentary, providing nuance and insight into major events of the past and the lives of the people who lived through them. The world was fleshed out to a whole new degree, and the motivations of many characters were revealed to be far more complicated than we previously thought. And, like previous seasons, the show does a superb job of beefing up its supporting characters. Ogata's background and personality are given even more frightening context. Tsukishima's origins are also offered, revealing a much more worn and principled character than we thought. Kironaki is given a whole new set of circumstances as well, as we finally learn more about his motivations. I once read a comment about Golden Kamuy suggesting that every character is so well written that any one of them could be a main protagonist. And I think that's true. Many shows have many characters, but few develop them beyond set dressing, and almost none develop them to the extent that Golden Kamuy has. Nearly every single character has been developed to the point that any one of them can carry an entire episode, and I think it's too easy to take that for granted. By the end of the season, the arc came to a satisfying and comfortable end. But don't worry, it was still Golden Kamuy. We still got a lot of shifting alliances and strange bedfellows. We still got satisfying cooking and food scenes. We still got moments of intense action and jaw-dropping violence. And yes, there was still the hilarious, muscly fan service that we've all come to enjoy. Season 3 is a great entry in the Golden Kamuy series, offering robust world building and reinforcement of the story's foundation, while still managing to hit all those classic Golden Kamuy beats. Taking the fourth spot, Arachi and Shimamura. The beginning of the first episode of Arachi and Shimamura is deceptively pedestrian. Some mild Yuri glances between the two, a red-cheeked exchange here and there. A shot construction not so subtly dominated by the male gaze, full of thighs and short skirts. But by the end of that first episode, I was floored at the care with which the characters and situations were written. Arachi and Shimamura centers on the relationship between two socially detached teens. They meet when they both skip class in the gym, and gradually become friends as they play games to pass the time. However, as Arachi begins to feel her fondness for Shimamura grow, their relationship becomes more complicated, exacerbated by each of their socially awkward tendencies. I can't recall the last time I've seen this level of emotional minutia in anime. As characters, Arachi and Shimamura start out similarly. Both are loners with little motivation to put themselves out there, but whereas Arachi's social reluctance arises out of shyness and a fear of rejection, Shimamura's is rooted in a lack of motivation and social attachment. And as the show progresses, the principal storyline becomes Arachi overcoming her hesitancy in the face of Shimamura's lack of interest. The inner monologues are highly detailed and introspective, offering the viewer a great window into the precise mental reasonings and personalities of each character. It is this emotional foundation that firmly establishes the characters, allowing their idiosyncrasies to effortlessly drive the story. Knowing the characters this intimately adds another level of depth to both dialogue and physical interactions. Those emotional micro-foci, rather than a reliance on pure tangible action and reaction, produces a great character-driven narrative. Each exchange, no matter how small, produced appreciable ripples in their perceptions of themselves and one another. Every interaction was a grand event. Will that response's phrasing put them down a path of no return? Will that physical brush between the two lead to something more? It was like watching an emotional butterfly effect in real time, leaving the viewer on the edge of their seat in the short term and stressing over what may come down the road in the long term. And I think that was the point. Those countless small ripples gathered into waves, the perception of which would not be possible without our degree of understanding of the characters. The writing also completely captures the insecurities and worries of someone finding themselves in their youth. There are plenty of painful yet hilarious train wreck as Adachi's immaturity crashes against her efforts to voice her desires. This makes the teen element of the story very well done, which I was grateful for since I initially found the writing to be wasted on yet another teen anime romance. But the show shut me up, offering such emotional complexity while staying true to the realities of young love and self-discovery. My only gripe is that, due to the source material author's inclusion of a character from one of their other titles, there is a shoehorned supporting character that feels very out of place at times. She doesn't offer much to the plot, other than to serve as an occasional icebreaker. But that aside, Arachi and Shimamura is a great study in how to write believable character progression. It's enthralling, full of heartburn, speckled with comedy, and offers a rarely seen depth of character emotion. Taking the bronze medal at number 3, ReZero Season 2 Part 1. When we last left ReZero in 2016, the story was on a triumphant high, following the defeat of the White Whale and the climax of the battle against the Archbishop of Sloth. Things were looking pretty happy, and Subaru and Emilia were reunited. However, the happiness is short-lived, as the story takes a sharp turn in Season 2. Subaru is immediately thrust into a new gauntlet of death and mystery, focusing on the mysterious sanctuary and its inhabitants. ReZero is a very difficult show to talk about without spoilers, so I wanted to start this by touching on the concept of mystery in the series and how it was handled. What I liked about Season 2 Part 1 is that it's managed to grow its sense of mystery while simultaneously revealing more of the world. It warrants a comparison to the show Lost. If you never saw Lost or weren't a part of the phenomenon when it was airing, then you wouldn't know that it was an absolutely groundbreaking television mystery that, unfortunately, ultimately collapsed under its own intrigue. The joke at the time was that after every episode of Lost, you would have one answer and 10 more questions. Too much mystery and not enough answers ultimately bred contempt for the story. So, having gone through that before, I've always been worried about how the ReZero anime would handle the weight of the story's unknowns. And so far, after what I've seen of Season 2, the answer to that question appears to be by spreading out the mysteries rather than deepening them. If Lost gave you a new puzzle to solve every episode, then ReZero is simply making the puzzle bigger. You have even more missing pieces, but far more context. For example, we see the Sanctuary, which fills us in on some plot holes from last season, but that quickly breeds its own set of mysteries. We find out more about who might be aware of Subaru's circumstances, but that raises even more questions about their motivations. We even learn more about the archbishops and the witches, but their history and influence is still shrouded in mystery. The result of these revelations in the face of a growing fog of world is a change in scale, one that can at once make you feel like you know more, but are still flying by the seat of your pants. It's a dizzying experience that the inquisitive mind can't resist. In this season, the underpinnings of Subaru's personality are also, in a word, vivisected for the viewer. The process was one of the most heartrending and cathartic things I had seen during the year. And Subaru, as a protagonist, sorely needed it. Having that window into what made him who he is reinvested the viewer. It endeared Subaru to me and put his previous actions in a context I was not even aware of. I really wish I could go into this one more and not be so nondescript, but with a show like this, it's very difficult to even touch on without spoilers. But overall, Season 2 Part 1 has been marked by ever-widening intrigue and shocking developments, amplified by some superb direction and shot composition. It keeps what made Season 1 great, while also doing its best to retain the viewer with new subject matter to chew on. I am very much looking forward to what happens in the second half. The runner-up at number 2, Kaguya-sama Loves War Season 2. Kaguya-sama Loves War was a standout hit in 2019. It took the basic premise of school-based romance and imbued it with all the cerebral gymnastics of Death Note. The result was a unique and hilarious take on the romantic comedy genre. So I was very excited for Season 2's premiere in the spring. When we last left the student council, Shirogane and Shinomiya's war to make the other confess their love hadn't produced a winner, but did result in a lot of laughs and a handful of emotional moments. Season 2 expands on existing characters and introduces new ones, while also exploring new territory in the continuing war between Shirogane and Shinomiya. Season 1 of Loves War was fantastic, period. But the thought of rehashing that same formula for another whole season didn't exactly fill me with confidence. So after somehow neglecting to read ahead in the manga, I was kind of worried about what Season 2 would entail. But, to my delight, the show managed to retain the tone and comedy of Season 1 while also breaking new ground. I found that while Season 1 was wide, full of sharp, varied comedy and a middling amount of character development, Season 2 could be considered deep, meaning that the comedic hook that dominated Season 1 was slightly dialed back for the sake of more in-depth focus on both the main duo and the supporting characters. The main beneficiary of this shift was undoubtedly Ishigami. His previous self-deprecation, a great comedic punching bag in Season 1, was revealed to be the result of much more serious events from his past. The episodes that focused on him in the latter half of the season brought some very refreshing background that was sorely missing from the supporting characters. We also had a new character join the cast, whose neurotic introduction introduced some great conflicts with the main characters. Her eventual joining of the main cast saw the sorely needed inclusion of a straight man to the comedic dynamic, which was something I didn't even know was needed until I saw how well it worked. Another benefit of the inclusion of this new character is that it allowed the show to get more mileage out of the war between Shirogane and Shinomiya. By showing an ongoing conflict through a new perspective, a show can elongate the amount of time before its shtick gets old. A very smart writing tactic, in my opinion. Not that the show is getting old. In fact, without getting into spoilers, this season saw some significant developments with the main duo in terms of being more honest with their feelings and growing closer. In addition, the show just looked good. The style was clean, the lines were sharp, and the colors were popping. The animation was so fucking crisp. You probably won't find it in any Sakuga compilations, but hot damn did it look good. Overall, it was a great entry in the series, hitting all the usual beats while also offering some great new plot lines to explore. The primary angle of the show retained its edge with its progression, as well as new perspectives. It was fun, looked great, and still brought the comedy it was known for. And in my opinion, a rare example of the sequel being better than the original. Also, Chika was there and better than ever, so it was automatically good. And finally, at number 1, Sing Yesterday for me. It's always a good feeling to get caught off guard by a great anime. To go into a show without any knowledge of the source material, wondering what's around every corner. So as someone who doesn't read a lot of manga, I was sucker punched by how great Sing Yesterday for me was. So much so that it's now the hands down best romance anime I've ever seen. This is not a coming-of-age story. These are not high school students in a club. These are adults facing the realities of their own inadequacies, crashing against a world that doesn't give a shit about them. The show follows aimless college grad Rikuo, who spends his monotonous days working at a convenience store and living a dreary, uneventful life. That is, until the outgoing Haru crashes his boring existence, much to his annoyance. And to make matters more complicated, Rikuo's old flame Shinako suddenly comes back into the picture. On paper, this might read like a cliché harem anime, but the execution is of a decidedly rare caliber. To begin with, the groundwork is well laid with adult characters ripe for intimate storytelling. Each main player starts from a place of discomfort, whether it's an ennui-infused fugue, the inability to confront one's own inadequacies, an unwillingness to let go of the past, or unhealthy lifelong attachments. Each central character possesses a rich medium from which their desires and pain grow. As a result, I found every single character's actions to be the direct consequence of their expertly written personality and circumstances. The progression of both the characters and their relationships are grounded in realistic emotional responses, laid out to the viewer in such a way that every development feels at once both logical and driven by emotions. Through a series of complex and believable interpersonal scenarios, Sing Yesterday for me weaves a painful and relatable tale of both love and love lost. It was a masterclass in character-driven romance. What I'm trying to say is, the thing felt damn real. I could effortlessly follow every line of reasoning in every monologue. Every exchange emanated realism and relatability. The highs made me feel elated, and the lows felt like slow-motion train wrecks. I felt their pain and their desires. I felt invested, as if my own happiness was at stake. And, as only great stories can do, I grew to hate certain characters while also fully understanding their motivations. And, personally, as someone who said goodbye to their teenage years long ago, it was refreshing to see a romance that left the high school campus behind in favor of the hard edges of adult working life. There were no bashful or coy games of cat and mouse, which I do enjoy from time to time, but it's simply beyond rare to see a mature post-high school romance in anime, especially one so well done such as this. It has to also be mentioned that the aesthetic and art style served to magnify the pain and longing of the subject matter. With its rough and grungy style, the visual aspects of Sing Yesterday for me are a perfect complement to the plot. The edges are roughly hewn and raw, never failing to match the passion of the scenes. The environments effortlessly convey atmospheres of both despair and hope. The characters and their expressions are devoid of extraneous illustration, leaving nothing but pure, unadulterated sentiment. It's messy yet clear in its message. For me, seeing Yesterday for Me was captivating on a scale rarely seen. Every week I waited with both bated breath and nervous dread. It was easily the most realistic and emotional complex anime I've ever watched. To call this an emotional journey would be insufficient. The viewer is witness to the intimate evolution of emotional maturity within multiple characters, each path winding and trampling on the other until each one arrives at their inevitable final destination. So, for me, hands down, Seeing Yesterday for Me was the best anime of 2020. That does it for my top 10 anime of 2020. Was it close to yours? See anything you absolutely agree or disagree with? Let me know. I'd be happy to see what other people thought of these series. And if you have any recommendations about what to watch in 2021, let me know as well. I'm always on the lookout for a good show. Thank you so much for sitting through my boring ranting. I hope this list finds you well, and that your 2021 is everything you hope for. Thanks for watching.